Rumble. The deadliest man in the CIA, Ted Shackley, Eastern Europe to Kennedy's assassination. Now, again, I want to remind the audience we are talking about a CIA officer, Kevin Ship, that the CIA tried to kill at least once. He thinks twice. And this is what he had to say about this subject. I'm going to quote this. "We finished an internal investigation into the vulnerability of cover of CIA agents," said Jim Callahan, the investigator for the IG office, former CIA agent and recipient of the CIA Intelligence Medal for Heroism. "I felt like one of the knights at the King Arthur's table. I was sitting on one side of a long table with a clutch of executives from the IG office, while the acting head of the operations directorate of the CIA, William Sullivan, sat cowering at the other end." Now, this is going back to when he was the basically whistleblower on the vulnerabilities of the computer program, just for those of you who've been with us through this whole thing. The senior IG official stood up in a strong voice and said, "The threat is real. You were informed about it and you failed to act. You and the CIA are officially rebuked for intentionally covering up the issue, refusing to address it, and placing the lives of CIA officers overseas in danger for more than a decade." Now, think about this. I will tell you what we said earlier in the chapter that covered this. They had a known vulnerability in a computer system that had all of the overseas agents' names in it. They wanted to keep that vulnerability in case they had to kill one of their agents and blame it on someone else. That's the Reader's Digest version of that chapter. The senior IG official, as you know, I reached this moment in 1998 only by going around my superiors, enlisting the help outside of the CIA, and even though I would receive accommodation for my work, I knew there would be a target on my back. Yeah, a target so big they tried to kill him and his family. But little did I know that targeting would likely come from the CIA's most notorious assassin. After the bombshell report I'd authored on the CIA's intentional negligence was published to the entire intelligence community, all agencies, I received a call from the Director of Operations. I was advised that the legendary spy master, Ted Shackley, wanted to talk to me about the agency and how they were going to deal with my report. How do I justify calling Ted Shackley a spy master? Well, you don't have to believe me. Just look at the title of Ted's own posthumously published autobiography, entitled, quote, "Spy Master, My Life in the CIA," unquote. Some may wonder where Ted Shackley is in the afterlife. I don't wonder at all. He is in hell. He's probably below hell. I'm reminded of the last reported words of CIA counterintelligence chief James Jesus Angleton as he lay dying, quote, "The better you lie and the more often you betrayed, the more likely you would be to be promoted. If you were in a room with them, you were in a room full of people that you had to believe would deservedly end up in hell. I guess I will see them all there soon," unquote. The foreword to Ted Shackley's book, written by B. Hugh Tover, a former member of the OSS in China-Burma India Theater of World War II and 30-year CIA veteran, sets out what Shackley hoped to achieve in his story. Now, again, B. Hugh Tover was one of the guys that helped set Chiang Kai-shek up in Formosa and was there when Paul Helliwell was arranging the entire drug trade and how it was going to operate and the money laundering with the Vatican, just for those who may be joining us. Quote from his book, "The late Ted Shackley's life as a spy master in the CIA could have made a great novel, but he was much too serious about life to have written one. Life to him meant work. During the 3 decades of his career in the CIA, he stands out as one of the most comparatively small group of men who have had a significant impact on the agency's clandestine operations. The title of this book, especially his use of the word my, suggests that he was writing the autobiography or perhaps a memoir in a classical vein. Not so. This book offers very little insight into his own background. Instead, it's an effort to distill from Shackley's own experience in the intelligence business the kernel of knowledge that he deemed essential. Wearing his instructor's hat and with no preliminaries, he launched the reader into a systematic examination of what the old master, Alan W. Dulles, called the craft of intelligence, unquote. Let me tell you how this former CIA intelligence officer and trained analyst interprets the opening. The writer is telling you quite clearly he's going to avoid the controversial parts of Shackley's career, such as his role in running the operations against Castro, establishing the Phoenix assassination program in Vietnam, estimated to have killed 40,000 Vietnamese, the Kennedy assassination, and the Watergate scandal, the part he played in the Iran-Contra scandal, which nearly brought down the entire Reagan administration, or his suspected organization of what famed constitutional lawyer Danny Sheehan called the Secret Team, a band of mercenary CIA assassins for hire to dictators around the world and other unsavory characters. Unknown caller. Now, the assassins for hire didn't work for the dictators. That's wrong. He evidently doesn't know that the CIA assassins worked for the international syndicate that installed the dictators and used the assassins. So I'm just going to remind you of that. But just because you won't be getting certain truths from this account doesn't mean there's nothing of value to be found reading through Shackley's manual for clandestine operations overseas and at home. Let me reemphasize the last part. At home. In fact, at CIA, we were taught to focus intensely on such writings of a target individual, for as Freud believed, despite our best efforts, we long to tell the truth about ourselves. Let's look at Shackley's inadvertently reveals when he puts his instructor hat on to tell us about the CIA's clandestine operations overseas and how they need to manipulate the American public at home in order to get around the fact that what they're doing is illegal. This is a quote from his book. Turning to examples close to home, compare 2 CIA-sponsored invasions. First of all, Guatemala, and then Cuba at the Bay of Pigs. The important thing to remember in this context are that 1, the U.S. government heartily endorsed and supported the Guatemalan operation, whereas the Cuban operation enjoyed only a grudgingly acquiesced by the administration that inherited, because the entire thing was planned by Eisenhower. 2, the American press was friendly in the first instance and hostile in the second. No, they were not. The hostility he talks about is the fact that they recognized the aircraft B-29 or 27 that landed not being Castro's. That's what he considered a hostile press, because they noticed it was the wrong airplane. And they were able to reveal the entire thing was a fraud. Number 3, we succeeded in the first and failed in the second. Covert operations can be deceptively peaceful as a letter writing campaign or as flagrantly violent as a guerrilla uprising. In every case, though, the instigating government must make at least a token effort to hide its hand. The flood of letters inveighing against the neutron bomb during the Carter administration and apparently sent by simple peace-loving citizens would have been ineffective had they been signed by the KGB's agent. Here, the need for tight cover by the Soviet sponsors of the letter campaign was imperative. Sure. Shackley is telling you exactly what is necessary for the CIA to pull off a successful operation overseas. You have to lie to the American people. The elected government must be behind it, and the press in the US must be in favor of it as well. The reader is left wondering two questions. What might the CIA do to a president that doesn't show the enthusiasm for their planned operation? And number two, what might the CIA do to generate the desired support with the American media? Kevin Shipp says, I encourage you to look at recent American history, which we've been doing for 2.5 years, starting with the Kennedy assassination in 1963 to the 1968 assassination of Martin Luther King and RFK to the modern day through the lens of those two questions. In other words, with your gladio glasses on. Perhaps I'm reading between the lines, but it doesn't seem as if Shackley was too pleased with the Kennedy administration lack of enthusiasm about the Cuba plan because they were basically shit. And even the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff told them they were shit. Shackley continued with his instructions for the would-be clandestine operative, quote, for simplicity's sake, we classify covert tactics under the general heading of psychological warfare, political action, and paramilitary. But in doing this, we risk muddling strategic thought because the lines between the pigeonholes are not always sharply defined. For example, influencing public opinion clearly falls under the heading of psychological warfare, meaning that they have been conducting psychological warfare on the American public since the day they were created. Going on with the quote, but how about influencing a government? Changing a government through elections is undeniably a form of political action, but what about changing it through terrorism? And how clearly drawn is the line between terrorism and guerrilla warfare? In what follows, I will use these 3 P words many times, but the reader should be warned that not all of my examples will fall neatly into one category. Unquote. The fatal flaw of most secret organizations is that they're staffed by human beings. If we do not tell the truth, it makes us physically ill at some level. That's why so many of the agents in the intelligence agency end up burnout, drunk, drug addicted, hollow shells of people. If you want to enjoy robust health, you have to be honest. Why do I think Shackley was being so honest about his philosophy as he was dying? Because it felt good to finally tell the truth. As horrible as it was, he did not see himself as a monster. He appears the monster that he appears to us. But even with the realization many might see him as a villain, it felt better than hints of his great adventures in the shadow. And what monstrous truth did the legendary spy master reveal? Shackley gives us a menu of dirty tricks of the CIA. There's psychological warfare, which we can conclude influencing a country and its government. There's political action, which can include changing a government. And finally, there's paramilitary, which occupies a murky area somewhere between guerrilla warfare and terrorism. So those are his 3 Ps: psychological warfare, political action, and paramilitary. Shackley instructs us, though, not to have such sharp distinction between the 3, because generally they do all of them, all at the same time. First, they use psychological warfare and can persuade a target country to voluntarily accept their desired actions as an influence campaign, if you will, with carefully chosen influencers. And I cannot emphasize this part enough, because you guys need to keep in mind, just as we call AOC IA, she's an influencer. And as we talked about yesterday, she's very, very bright. She knows exactly what she's doing, and she's been trained to do it. X is full of influencers. And at least some of them, and we don't necessarily know which ones, are part of a destabilization effort inside the United States. Second, if your psychological warfare has been unsuccessful, one is likely to proceed to political action, like overthrowing an election, and change the government by any means necessary, but preferably in the least visible way, which is why they use the election systems. Third, if the first two strategies have failed, one proceeds to violent kinetic action, accepting that the line between guerrilla warfare and terrorism is very thin. There's no line at all, actually. And he acknowledges that, if it exists at all. The great trick of the CIA over the years have been to fool the public as to the rules by which they play. To the public, it appears as if things just happen, whether it is an unstable political challenger who may have had some reasonable criticisms, like Donald Trump. They paint him as being unstable, but apparently had some substantial personal failings that rendered him or her unsuitable for leadership, which they pounce on. And that's exactly what they did to Donald Trump. Donald Trump, however, overcame their labeling him as unstable. The illusion that the CIA and other intelligence agencies are neutral in the affairs of the US is a necessary fiction. The agency needs the public to believe that narrative if they are to have any hope of maintaining their power. And I believe with all of my heart that that's the reason why Operation Gladio is buried. That is the reason why no one will touch it, because once you understand it, all of the illusion is gone. Let's go to Shackley's book, which describes psychological warfare, specifically the shaping of public opinion when it comes to the media and books. Quote, newspapers have been another favorite medium for the CIA, just as they have been for the KGB. He always has to justify what he's doing by saying there's a boogeyman out there. In the early days, we tended to go whole hog, acquiring entire newspapers by funding them at the top. But we gradually learned that it was usually more effective to have a relationship with an individual and to get out messages into print through that stringer, the staff writer or the editor. An apparent violation of this rule was our funding of the Chilean newspaper El Mercurio. But our purpose in that case was to keep the newspaper alive as a symbol of resistance, as well as the vehicle through which to surface an anti-Allende material, unquote. So basically, they funded the entire newspaper. I hope it's obvious, Kevin Ship. I hope it's obvious to the reader, but the CIA views free speech in other countries and in America as just another tool they can exploit for their own benefit. And the best influence campaign is the one where you do not believe that you're being manipulated. And this game is still being played. And if the CIA was willing to make an exception in Chile and buy an entire newspaper, might they not do the same thing in the United States? He obviously is unaware that they did that. And the UPI was bought by basically Reverend Moon and the Unification Church, which we've already established is part of the KCIA, which is part of the CIA. Another one of those post-World War II intelligence agencies that was brought up and molded under the influence of the CIA. They also bought an entire newspaper in Washington, D.C. called the Washington Times. That newspaper is lock, stock, and barrel an intelligence operation. And of course, we know the Washington Post and their affiliation. That may be exactly what they did in 2014 with the purchase of the Washington Post by Amazon CEO Jeff Bezos. An opinion piece from the 2014 entitled "Why the Washington Post New Ties to the CIA Are So Ominous," unquote. It raises the possibility of the following. Quote, American journalism has entered a highly dangerous terrain. A tip off is that the Washington Post refuses to face up to a conflict of interest involving Jeff Bezos, who's now the sole owner of the powerful newspaper. At the same time, he remains Amazon's CEO and main stakeholder. The Post is supposed to expose CIA secrets, but Amazon is under contract to keep them. Amazon had a new $600 million cloud contract for the CIA. So they basically had all of the secrets of the CIA inside of their facility while at the same time owning the Washington Post. And we know how that's worked out. Unquote. So, just to keep the players straight, Jeff Bezos is the owner of Amazon. CIA awards them a $6 million contract. Bezos then went out shortly afterwards and bought the Washington Post, which was famously losing money for years. Many have suggested the CIA's world's largest creator of quote unquote coincidences. Now, what they're inferring, without coming out and saying it, is that $600 million actually included not just a contract for cloud service, but included the price of buying the Washington Post. So in effect, Amazon was acting as a front company for the CIA to buy the Washington Post. I'll just go ahead and say it. The article continues with possible conflicts of interest of the billionaire's company working for the CIA while at the same time owning a newspaper that is supposed to report on the CIA. Quote, the Washington Post's refusal to provide readers with a minimum disclosure and coverage of the CIA is important in its own right, but it's also a marker of an ominous pattern combining denial with accommodations to raw financial and government power, a synergy of media leverage, corporate digital muscle, and secretive agencies in implementing policies of mass surveillance, covert action, and ongoing warfare. Digital prowess at collecting global data and keeping secrets is crucial to the mission of Amazon and the CIA. The two institutions have only begun to explore how to work together more effectively. For the CIA, the emerging newspaper role of Mr. Amazon is value added to any working relationship with him. The CIA's zeal to increase its leverage over American media outlets is longstanding, unquote. The next time you see another flattering media portrayal of Jeff Bezos, you may want to ask some questions, like the 2021 Netflix series Shatner in Space, where Bezos gives a free ride on his rocket to the famed actor William Shatner, best known for his portrayal of Captain Kirk in the classic Star Trek. In one sense, the two men are riding their horses, talking about life, just like two regular guys. A viewer may wonder, is that a real story or a CIA production? The latest rocket, which obviously wasn't available to this guy, definitely tells you that Jeff Bezos is in the propaganda business, 100%. Perhaps the viewer is thinking to himself that Jeff Bezos sure is a great guy, giving Captain Kirk a real chance to go into space. And then Shatner returned to Earth and broke down crying, saying how beautiful and fragile our planet is, blah, 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 and how he absolutely loves the billionaire. But our instructor in clandestine operations, Ted Shackley, tells me the CIA's psychological operations aren't just limited to newspapers and traditional media. For the more discerning among us, they can also include books. This is a quote from the book. To get its message out to book reading audiences, the CIA has inspired the writing of some books to assist in the distribution of others. I would also say that they prohibit the distribution of ones they don't like, that is real. When in 1954, the Yugoslav communist Milosevic broke down, Milovan Djilas, I don't know how you say his last name, Djilas, broke with the party and subsequently wrote a book in which he had denounced the corruption and privilege of Yugoslavia's new rulers. The CIA saw to it that his effort reached the widest possible readership. We have also written some books ourselves. The Russian agent Oleg Penkovsky used to speak at length in his debriefing sessions about the injustice of the Soviet system and his wish that Russian people might someday enjoy the many freedoms taken for granted in the West. When he was arrested and executed in 1963, there was no longer any reason to keep his views from the public. The CIA therefore arranged for a careful culling and editing of his operational file and had a book published called the Penkovsky Papers. It didn't at all represent what he had actually written. It was very choicely written by the CIA because they have to maintain that Soviet Union is the boogeyman persona. If you are a regular consumer of newspapers, the CIA knew how to get information into your hands with Project Mockingbird. If you were a book person, they covered that venue as well. There was an article in Vanity Fair in February of 2024 that responded to this possibility. Quote, in a statement, Deputy Pentagon Press Secretary Sabrina Singh told Politico, quote, to set the record straight, Taylor Swift is not part of a DoD psychological operation, period, unquote. I'm still inside the quote from Vanity Fair, though. While conspiracy theories surrounding Swift reached a fever pitch this weekend after her boyfriend football team clinched a spot in the Super Bowl, the arguably most demented moment came last month when a Fox News anchor, Jesse Waters, went on air and declared, not a joke, around 4 years ago, the Pentagon Psychological Operations Unit floated turning Taylor Swift into an asset during a NATO meeting. And we've all been made aware of that, unquote. What do I think about such a claim? Ship asked. I have no information which would allow me to confirm or deny. However, as a former intelligence operative, I'd say to myself, if you could pull that off, it might just work. Who would seriously consider a singer whose biggest audience is adolescent females who've probably never had a serious boyfriend as an intelligence agent or asset? It's only little less believable than using the head of a local bank or the CEO of America's oldest investment banking firm, like Cromguard. With this story, I suggest putting a pin to it and coming back to it in 5 years and see if you have a different opinion. Certainly, one of the strangest things that happened to me during my time at the CIA was being told to report to Ted Shackley for a discussion of my report, which had so thoroughly embarrassed the director of operations. I figured the old spook had retired years ago. For God's sake, he'd enlisted in the Army in 1945, recruited into Army's counterintelligence corps in 1947 because of his fluency in Polish, then assigned in September 51 to the CIA. What was this man even doing at the CIA in 1998, especially since he had been so publicly linked to Iran-Contra in 1987? Not to mention his association with the Phoenix assassination program during the Vietnam War. The official record states Shackley retired from the CIA in 1979, but nearly 2 decades later, it appears he's still in residence. Shackley was nicknamed the Blonde Ghost because of his pale complexion that many people remember. From the Vietnam War, quote, oh man, was Shackley Weird, a CIA officer who was in Laos, recalled, providing a slightly exaggerated description of his chief. Tall, thin, real tall, a cold man, real cold, calm, quiet. He just kind of looked at you in a weird way. And real white skin, real white. He never went out in the sun. Man, he never went out in the sun, unquote. Shackley's office was in the part of the CIA building that Kevin Shipp had never, ever been in. I pushed open a door to see a large room with empty walls and a large desk in the center, with a tall, pale Shackley standing in front of it. Kevin, he said loudly as I walked in the room, the CIA is going to do something about this. Do you understand the CIA is going to do something about this? For a report with such importance as mine, I would have expected to meet the director of the CIA, his executive officer, or the director of security at the very least. But here I was standing talking to one of the most disreputable characters in the entire history of the CIA, accused of everything from gun running to drug trafficking and assassination, which basically makes up the entire CIA. Yes, sir, I said to Shackley. That will be all, Shackley said, in concluding what was probably the shortest meeting I'd ever had at the CIA. Was that something which Shackley promised, sending me and my family to a toxic waste dump at a secret base where Shackley's secrets were buried? I believe my report had put a target on my back, but I hadn't expected the agency would enlist its most legendary assassin to take me down. To this day, I'm puzzled why he summoned me to his office for such a brief meeting. Was Shackley old school in that he wanted to look me in the eye before deciding to kill me? The question felt mute, as I still am above ground and he is not. And while Shackley's own book, he did not want to reveal all of his secrets, other writers were interested in digging them up anyway. One of the most authoritative books on Shackley is called The Blonde Ghost, Ted Shackley and the CIA's Crusades by David Korn, a former Washington editor of a left-leaning publication called The Nation. It was published in 1994. In the opening of the book, Korn describes Shackley in the following manner, quote, Ted Shackley, like most CIA people, was no James Bond. He was a manager and in that sense, a representative of a certain breed of intelligence officers, an intellicrat, like a bureaucrat, only for intelligence. He made decisions and participated in actions with life and death consequences, but usually from behind a desk. For many CIA employees during the Cold War, the real drama in the intelligence business did not come from face-to-face confrontation with armed KGB officers. It was found in an office in headquarters or a base overseas, where a U.S. government employee decided which foreign national would be enticed to become a spy, how to handle a defector, where to land a sabotage team, what village or area would be targeted for bombing. Shackley was a government bureaucrat who did all of this. He was an organization man, a spy in a gray flannel suit. Through decades of Cold War, Shackley took orders that came from the White House and the CIA's top command and turned them into reality. People like Shackley were the heart and soul of the agency, the ones who saluted smartly and did concrete abstractions of the Cold War, the people who guaranteed that the dirty work got done, unquote. This guy, Kevin Shipp, says that he thinks Korn's book, and I do have that book, I'm about halfway through it, is one of the best written accounts of Ted Shackley and the operations of the CIA. In addition, the book was published in 1994, 4 years before I would be told to visit with Shackley to discuss my report. Writing about a public figure while the person is still active is like trying to build a plane while you're flying it. However, even if one may not be able to tell the whole truth, many truths will inevitably be revealed. Korn's book does an admirable job of sketching out the arc of Shackley's career. Korn also strikes me as a certain type of liberal, almost extinct in modern America, one who was distrustful of the intelligence agency and a staunch defender of the Constitution, as well as the ideals of the representative government. Korn also comes across to me as a man aware of his own biases, and in America, which used to in the America that used to exist, worried about such bias might possibly skew his coverage. Korn gives the reader the information that he can verify, often leading right up to the brink of what many could consider illegal or treason, but doesn't cross that line. In most nuances, it's because such information has been classified under the cloak of national security. For more than a quarter century, many Americans have adopted a different standard when it comes to intelligence agencies. Instead of adopting a position where no such evidence exists, when the evidence has been hidden under a veil of national security, the more discerning citizen has concluded that if the intelligence agencies do not answer legitimate questions, it's because they're guilty of significant wrongdoing. The only thing we're missing are the specific details. I don't claim the standard will be accurate in all instances, but based on his own personal experience, it likely is because they cover up information that's uncomfortable, not information necessarily that has anything to do with national security. He goes on to say, for Shackley's early CIA years dealing with Poland in the early 1950s, he's talking about kind of just a broad overview. Second, his work as CIA station chief in Miami in the early 60s, dealing with the campaign against Fidel Castro's Cuba, personnel from Miami's CIA station would later be accused of being involved in the assassination of JFK, and some of those same members would be convicted of being involved in Watergate, all trained by Ted Shackley. Third, Shackley's role as head of CIA operations in Vietnam in association with the Phoenix program. Fourth, his retirement in 1979, which most people would call being fired, by Admiral Stanford Turner under Carter. Fifth, his central role in what would later blossom into the Iran-Contra, literally after he'd been fired. And finally, Shackley's alleged role in the creation of what's called a secret team, which was an off-the-books group of former CIA assassins available for hire, which we call the Enterprise. That's another term that's used, but there is a book called The Secret Team, and I'm sure that's why he's using it. In 1952, the director of CIA was Walter Bedell Smith, and the man he'd tasked with CIA operations in Western Europe was named Frank Wisner, who was tasked with preventing the Soviet takeover. As detailed in the 2007 National Book Award winner, Legacy of Ashes, The History of the CIA. I've read that book too. Author Tim Weiner detailed what some of those plans entailed. Quote, while the war in Korea was still raging, the Joint Chiefs commanded Frank Wisner and the CIA to conduct a major covert offensive against the Soviet Union, aimed at the heartland of the communist control system. Wisner tried. The Marshall Plan was being transformed into pacts providing America's allies with weapons. And that's the beginning of Operation Gladio, by the way. That came from the Marshall Plan and the Rockefeller, according to Paul Williams' book. And Wisner saw this as a chance to arm secret stay-behind forces to fight the Soviets in the event of war. So he obviously knows about Operation Gladio. He was seeding the ground all over Europe, throughout the mountains and forests of Scandinavia, France, Germany, Italy, and Greece. His men were dropping gold ingots into lakes and burying caches of weapons for the coming battles. In the marshes and foothills of Ukraine and the Baltics, his pilots were dropped to their deaths. That was basically dropping them in those areas to create stay-behinds there, but none of them survived. And we've read about them. I talked at length about that when I was on the Alpha show, when we were talking about, especially in Ukraine and Albania, where they thought, according to the intelligence they were getting from Galen, which were all lies and made up bullshit, that there were people behind those lines and he provided them names and locations, and they would airdrop people in, and none of that existed. Because one of the things the Soviets did was they found all of those stay-behind people that were part of the resistance, and they either arrested them for what they would refer to as treason, or they killed them. They were all gone. And Galen knew this. Galen knew that most of those things, other than some left in Ukraine, was gone. And that's where the OUN, the uh, apparatus that gave us the Azov battalions and Right Sector and all of those were all stay behinds from the same operation. To put it bluntly, the Western intelligence agencies, the Americans, the British, the French, were losing badly to the Soviets. A trusted three-star general, Lucien K. Truscott, was sent to take over Wisner's operation in Germany to find problems with the program. He found plenty, including a system of secret prisons. Quote, the agency had set up clandestine prisons to wring confessions out of suspected double agents. This was black sites before we ever even knew black sites existed. One was in Germany, another one was in Japan. A third, and the biggest, was in the Panama Canal Zone. And you wonder why Panama didn't want us there? Like Guantanamo, it was a place where anything goes. The zone was its own world. Seized by the United States at the turn of the century, bulldozed out of the jungles that surrounded the Panama Canal, a Navy base in the zone, the CIA Office of Security had refitted a complex of cinder blocks into prison cells inside of a Navy brig normally used to house drunk and disorderly sailors. In those cells, the agency was conducting secret experiments, harsh interrogations, using torture, drugs, mind control, and brainwashing, unquote. The use of drugs in interrogations began in 1948, and the first name given to the effort was Project Artichoke. It would later be renamed MK Ultra. The problem the agency had was that many of the Russians and East German agents turned out to be failures, raising the question of whether they had been compromised or were double agents for the Soviet Union from the start. The need to find a foolproof interrogation method to smoke out suspected double agents was of paramount importance. And they would go to any length to do that, to include these black sites. Again, we're talking the late 40s and early 50s. On May 15, 1952, Alan Dulles and Frank Wisner received a report from Project Artichoke spelling out the agency's 4-year effort to test heroin, amphetamines, sleeping pills, the newly discovered LSD, and other special techniques in CIA interrogations. Part of the project sought to find an interrogation technique so strong that individuals under its influence will find it difficult to maintain a fabrication under questioning. In a few months, Dulles approved an a bit ambitious new program codenamed Ultra. Under its auspices, 7 prisoners at a federal penitentiary in Kentucky were kept high on LSD for 77 days. When the CIA slipped the same drug to an Army civilian employee, Frank Olson, he leapt out of a window to his death, unquote. The CIA seemed to love its secret prisons, its drug programs from the very start. These programs were just as disastrous for everybody involved from the beginning as they had been shown to be today. When you wonder if the intelligence agencies might be using a rock star like Taylor Swift for an influence campaign, just compare it to the image of CIA slipping LSDs to prisoners and its own employees who were squeaky clean. This is the CIA which Ted Shackley joined, and he would soon have his own similarly spectacular failure in Poland with a phantom army of freedom fighters. Quote, toward the end of 52 and the last months of Smith's tenure as director of the CIA, more of Wisner's hastily improvised operation began coming apart. This fallout left a lasting impression on the newly appointed CIA officer named Ted Shackley, who started a supercharged career at the agency as a second lieutenant, shanghaied from the job training military police in West Virginia. His first assignment was to make himself familiar with a major Wisner operation to support the Polish Liberation Army, the Freedom and Independence Movement known as WIN. Now, everything about what I just read is disturbing. They literally have a guy that's in the army as a second lieutenant that is embedded in the CIA. And this goes to the heart of the problem with our military today. You have no idea, because this still goes on today, who in the military are actually in the military and not part of the CIA. The same with the FBI, the same with the DEA, the same with the IRS. We have found CIA assets and agents embedded in every organization in our government, to include Congress. Wisner and his men had dropped roughly $5 million worth of gold bars, submachine guns, rifles, ammunition, two-way radios into Poland. They had established trusted contacts with WIN, W-I-N, outside, a handful of immigrants in Germany and London. They blessed that WIN inside was a powerful force, 500 soldiers in Poland, 25,000 armed partisans, and 100,000 sympathizers, all prepared to fight the Soviet Union. Unquote. And yet, it was all part of a cleverly crafted illusion created by the Soviets and Polish intelligence services. Instead, what was happening is that the patriots outside of Poland, or communist double agents, were parachuting into the country where they'd be quickly picked up by the Polish and Soviet intelligence. With their drops in ammunition and money, the CIA was actually funding the communist groups. Quote, the Soviet and Polish intelligence services had spent years setting their traps. They were all aware of our air operations. When we would drop our agents in, they would go out and make contact with the people we knew who would be helpful to us. The Poles and the KGB were right in back of them and would mop them up. So it was a well thought out plan, except for we were recruiting agents of the Soviet Union to carry it out. It turned out to be a monumental disaster. People died, perhaps 30, maybe more. Shackley said he never forgot the sight of his fellow officers realizing that 5 years of planning and millions of dollars had gone down the drain. The unkindest cut might have been their discovery that the Poles had been sent a chunk of CIA money to the Communist Party in Italy, unquote. The communists in Europe were simply better at the intelligence game than the West. The OSS had been very successful pursuing agents in Western Europe against the Nazis, but the CIA was having little success against the Soviets in Eastern Europe. This frustration seemed to generate a certain kind of paranoia among early CIA officers. Ted Shackley was among the number who saw how badly the West was doing in this battle. The most significant posting for Shackley would be as the head of the CIA station in Miami, Florida, where the campaign against Cuban leader Fidel Castro was being ran. From his book, quote, on April 21st, 1962, Bill Harvey, the gruff gun-toting CIA man, was in Miami. He had not come to Florida to relax. The agency's not too covert war against communism had shifted to a new locale. Forget Europe. They were in Cuba, less than 100 miles away. Harvey, no longer in charge of the Berlin base, had been entrusted with perhaps the most sensitive assignment in the agency. He was to arrange the assassination of Fidel Castro, the Marxist leader of Cuba, whose demise was an obsession, supposedly of the Kennedy administration, but that's not true. It was an obsession of the CIA. Kennedy was actually opening back doors to both the Cuban leader and to the Soviet Union, and many people believe that was part and parcel of why he was assassinated. Back to the quote. Harvey arrived in Florida carrying 4 poison pills concocted by chemists of the CIA. As part of the scheme, Harvey was to provide $5,000 worth of explosive detonators, rifles, handguns, and boat radar to a leader of Cuban exiles in Miami. In return, this exile would smuggle the death pills into Cuba. Harvey ordered the agency's Miami station, codenamed JM Wave, to procure the equipment. The man in charge of rounding up the lethal goods was the officer Harvey had handpicked to head JM Wave Station, Ted Shackley. Unquote. I think it's important for the reader to fully understand the range of activities with which the agency was involved in Cuba. First, because the historical record is so abundantly well documented, and second, because a framework for how CIA operates as an entity when it identifies a target it wants to destroy. A common expression goes that, quote, integrity is who you are in the dark when no one is watching, unquote. In order to understand the true nature of at least some parts of the CIA, you must ask yourself the question of what they have done when they have been allowed to operate in the cover of darkness. Now, I don't necessarily want to spend a whole lot of time. We've covered the Cuban operation in huge detail. But there are a couple parts of this I want to highlight. As Kevin Shipp would later discover, some of Ted Shackley's secrets were buried at a secret base to which he had sent. That's the weaponry at the base that he was sent to outside of San Antonio. Here is a quote from the Cuban operation. Harvey and Shackley drove in an arms-filled U-Haul truck through the wet streets of Miami to a drive-in restaurant parking lot. Harvey passed the keys of a mob-linked hoodlum named Johnny Roselli, who was supposed to transfer the weapons to Cuban exiles. Fearing a double cross, Harvey and Shackley kept the parking lot under surveillance until the Cubans arrived and drove the truck away. The CIA, as part of an unholy trinity that included the mafia and Cuban exiles, was a step closer to murder. A short time later, the Cubans returned the truck empty, and Harvey and Shackley brought it back to the rental office. Then, for the spy master and his young associate, it was on to more official U.S. government business, unquote. So, that's basically... Then he goes on to say, this is another quote from that book. On July 28, 1976, handsome Johnny Roselli, a mobster who rose up the ranks with Al Capone, had brunch with his sister in Miami before borrowing his car and driving to the marina. There he boarded a private boat with two men, one of who was an old friend. But when they got to sea, the third man, someone Roselli didn't know from Chicago, strangled the 71-year-old gangster to death. He wasn't even on the vessel an hour, and he was dead, rubbed out by a mafia hitman who sawed off his legs, stuffed his body into a 55-gallon drum, and threw the drum overboard in Dumbfoundling Bay. It's a bad day, unquote. It's a bad day when you want to go fishing, but instead you end up strangled, your legs sawed off, placed in a 55-gallon drum, and dumped overboard. And that's literally how he was found in that barrel. Quote, part of Roselli's assignment in Los Angeles was to cultivate relationships with film industry hierarchy. He knew everybody, dated movie stars, played golf with studio heads. His closest industry friend was the boss of Columbia Pictures, Harry Cohn. They socialized together, and Johnny was often at the studio advising the mogul on his gangster pictures. When Cohn needed a large loan in a hurry, it was Johnny that put him together with the East Coast mobster, Abner Zellman. This had its own complications as the mobster maintained his secret piece of Cohn's studio for many years until he died suddenly, tortured to death, supposedly by his own hand, depending on which story you believe, unquote. Another hit job. So, he's just kind of priming the pump to tell you how all of this goes down. So, he goes on to say basically that Roselli was a virtual godfather in Las Vegas in the 50s and 60s. Roselli knew most of the big show stars who played in the showroom, Sinatra, Dean Martin, were personal friends of his. Um, Frank and Dean sponsored Johnny's membership into the Friar Club. The congressional hearings in the early 50s was the first in-depth government investigation into nationwide organized crime. Few people in America knew just how far reaching the mafia and the syndicate were, corrupting every area of the country. The investigation from Washington hauled in top gangsters, including Johnny Roselli. Unlike most of the mobsters who tried to play it tough and not say anything, and some went to jail for it, Roselli answered every question, but with a strategic skill that gave nothing away, unquote. Roselli was a cool customer, his nickname being Gentleman Gangster. But maybe it's not surprising that even though he was a known criminal figure because of his appearance in the 1950s, before that congressional hearing, the CIA would recruit him in the 60s and put him to work with Shackley. And when Roselli was slain in 1977, the New York Times conducted a hard-hitting investigation to determine who was behind it. Here's a quote. Every speculation that the CIA or Cuban agents might have been involved in Roselli's murder centered on the fact that another participant in the Castro assassination plots, Sam Giancana, a former mafia boss of Chicago, had been murdered in his home a year earlier. Mr. Giancana was killed shortly before he was scheduled to testify at the Senate Committee on Intelligence. Mr. Roselli himself testified for that committee 3 times. The last, a secret appearance 3 months before his death, when he was questioned about the assassination of President Kennedy. The CIA may have been involved, according to one theory, because it feared further damaging revelations about its mafia connections. The Cuban agents may have been involved, according to other theories, because they sought to retaliate for the plots to kill Mr. Castro, unquote. Let's just take a step back from the New York Times article to make sure we understand the situation. One of the major players in the CIA Mafia alliance, the former Chicago Mafia, Sam Giancana, was murdered a year earlier in his home shortly before he was to testify. Did no one think that Roselli might be in similar danger? The New York Times wants us to believe that there are 3 possible suspects: the Cubans, the CIA, and the mob. And they're going to do their best to find out which it is. Quote, if Cubans had killed Roselli, they would have shot him down in the street or blown him up in his car to make a point, not stuffed him in a barrel and threw him in the bay, said Detective Ojeda, a member of the Miami homicide team investigating Roselli's murder. The Cuban retaliation theory is also discounted by authorities like Robert Mayhew, the most important figure in the plots against Mr. Castro and later a chief aide to the late Howard R. Hughes. And I did a whole expose on Robert Mayhew. That guy is fascinating. And it points out that he wasn't touched and he knows much more than everybody else. Quote, I think Castro is sophisticated enough to know the historical context in which those things happen and forget about them, he said in his interview, unquote. So really, the only people left was the CIA, is the bottom line. And they talked to many Cubans in Miami and said, look, it's not like we don't do this shit, but that ain't how we do it. We're not going to go to the extent of sawing someone's legs off to make some point. We just shoot them in the head and leave them in an alley. So, if you really want the truth, it's probably best to ask the CIA guy for the answers, which of course no one wants to do. Here's another quote from that article. The possibility that the CIA may have had Mr. Roselli killed to keep him from disclosing damaging facts about the agency is discounted by those who knew him best, including his closest friend, Joseph Breen, who was his partner in a gift shop at Frontier Hotel in Las Vegas, which provided Roselli's only source of income, $60,000 a year, to his death. Mr. Breen said the CIA would not have killed Mr. Roselli over his Senate testimony because he had checked with the CIA. I mean, oh my God. including Bill Harvey, his CIA contact prior to his appearance, and they told him to tell whatever he knew because it was going to come out anyway. The agency, he said, would have no reason to kill him, unquote. What a bunch of shit. I mean, that's just absolutely hilarious. And Kevin Shipp says, can we perhaps look at the facts as stated in the New York Times in a little more skeptical light? Your business partner is strangled, cut up, and put in a 55-gallon drum by parties unknown. Do you finger the likely killer? Or are you afraid that if you do, you'll meet the same end as him and Giancana? And I'm not aware of any criminal investigator anywhere in the world who thinks that if you ask a suspect if they're involved in a crime and they deny it, that you close the case. That's exactly what the New York Times reporter did with Shackley's good buddy, the gift shop owner at the mob's casino and Roselli's CIA handler, Bill Harvey. Hey, CIA, did you have anything to do with killing this guy? Nope, not us. Okay, thanks. We're going to leave now. Basically, is what the New York Times article is saying. And to make things even more suspicious, Roselli wasn't pointing his finger at the CIA either, although the story he was telling seemed to be falling apart, as detailed in the New York Times article about his death. Quote, 3 months before his death, April 23rd, 1976, Mr. Roselli was questioned by the Kennedy assassination by representatives of the Senate Intelligence Committee, including Senator Schweiker of Pennsylvania, in secret sessions in a suite of the Carroll Arms Hotel. The manuscript of Mr. Roselli's testimony has been classified top secret, but a copy of it supposedly was examined by the Times. How's that happen? Mr. Roselli testified that he had told some people he believed that Fidel Castro was behind the Kennedy assassination when asked by Michael Epstein, a member of the committee staff, if he had any facts to back that up. He said no, unquote. Roselli was caught in a trap. He had been trained as an assassin, and our president had been assassinated. He was exactly the kind of person that had the skill set to do it. And perhaps more importantly, he was doing a bad job of pointing the finger at everybody else. But the New York Times wants you to believe that it was all about the mafia, conveniently forgetting that the entire Cuban operation was a CIA/mafia operation. It is conceivable that the CIA and mafia would have a mutual interest in seeing both Giancana and Roselli dead. On with the article. Mr. Giancana was killed because he tried to reassert his authority in the Chicago mob after a 10-year absence. Sam thought nothing had changed, but everything had changed, the mafia figure said. A task of killing Mr. Roselli proved difficult because he was a cautious man. Nevertheless, his pursuers were persistent. They would catch his movements for a couple of weeks, leave him alone for a few months, and then go back and watch him. The mafia figure said, Roselli was careful, but nobody can be that careful. When the decision gets made to hit you, you're dead, no matter how long it takes, unquote. Isn't it interesting that a New York Times reporter can get a mafia figure to talk quite openly about killing of two men, and yet the law enforcement authorities will never make an arrest in either of the cases? It should have made the public wonder if they were being played. Is this a real mafia figure introduced to the Times reporter by his CIA handler who had been vetted and fed a story, or is it one of the CIA's colorful cast of characters impersonating a mafia figure? Perhaps we will never know. So, he goes on and talks about some other very interesting operations, but I'm going to stop there, and we will continue this because I want his insight is vital to what we're doing. And I want you guys to hear his comments with the rest of this because it's very, very interesting. I also find it extremely interesting that he brings up Operation Gladio in the forms of the stay behind units. And he'll bring that up again in the future. So, anyway, lots of very interesting stuff in this book. So, I'm going to go ahead and open the mics to everyone. SR71, go ahead. I can't hear you if you're talking. Bridget, go ahead. Let me take SR71 down. Bridget, are you talking? It might be mine. Hold on, everybody. It's you. It's not you, it's me. Okay, let me get out of here and I'll come right back. I need to get SR71 back up here, though. I don't know where he went. Let me bring him back. And then I'm going to duck out real quick and I'll come back.
Okay. Silent Coup just arrived. It's a pretty interesting read. And then I've also, while Colonel was talking about that, ran down a couple of things from the Nixon tapes as well as H.R. Haldeman's book.
Crazy. It's just amazing how they're interlinked, isn't it?
Okay, I'm back.
Yay! Can you hear us now?
Yes, I can hear you.
Yay!
Okay.
Hopefully my mic's working well now.
Yes, I can hear you too, SR71. Go ahead and say what you were going to say.
Okay. Well, what I was going to say is I'm listening to all this stuff and I'm almost falling over in my chair because back in the 70s, it really turned LSD loose on the public. But the other thing that really gets me about this whole deal with Roselli and what was going on and all the assassinations in this from the CIA, no doubt, that took place at that time with these people in the mafia. It seems to me that what they were doing at that time and what was going on at that time, what they did and used for cover was the fact that, this was all because of drugs. All of this was going on in Miami already. Yet all of a sudden these people are dying, and the story you got back was, well, they didn't want to bring drugs into New York, and we had wars going on, and this, that, and the other. If I recall all of that correctly, isn't that true?
I mean, they told a story. The story they told was not true. Supposedly anybody that they killed was part of the quote unquote drug operation. And if anybody started asking questions, they implicated the person that died as being a drug dealer. And, it doesn't matter that we don't find who killed him because, he was a bad guy anyway. He was part of the mafia. He was part of the drug network. He was whatever. When they all were. And that guy just became inconvenient for them. That's the point you're trying to make, right?
Yes, ma'am. You got it.
Yeah, that's exactly what was happening. But I think to me, the big takeaway of this is it's clear that the CIA, not that we need to be told this again, but this is more factual evidence that the CIA has always operated inside the United States. And I think that is huge. Southern, go ahead.
Yes, I always thought CIA had to operate outside the U.S. That's why we had the FBI inside the U.S. But I have found a lot of new information. The CIA was obviously playing in the U.S. all the time. But I did some homework yesterday, Colonel, after we talked about AOC. Brand New Congress was a PAC that was set up to recruit progressive new candidates to run for office. And it is all of Bernie Sanders' people who worked for him and other agencies that supported and funding came together to pick her up. And they said they only took donations from individuals, no government, and they almost had to sign a document saying they would never accept money from companies or super PACs or whatever, which is not true, because there's another organization called Move On. Move On has two of them, and one of them takes money from Act Blue, and I worked back through it, and they've gotten USAID money, they have gotten dark money,
yes,
all this crap, and to keep AOC clean in this, they would take tranches of $10,000 to donate from Move On over to this new branch Congress. Now, what's interesting with that is after she was elected, everything was done, they shut it down. But another thing popped up on Move On, they brought in the squad. All the people in the squad, Ilhan, Amor, Presley, all of them. They went out and brought those in where they would be technically not under the big guys or the super PACs or any of that, but they're still getting money from Act Blue, which to me is a lot of dark money, and I guarantee it's foreign funding. But it's just interesting about that because we're learning more and more about all these 501c. What I found interesting is they will have two with very similar names, so they can operate differently, but money's flowing through them. And the problem with these 501cs and others like this out there, it's very muddy when it goes from one 501c to another one. So you really don't know where the money's going and how much money it is. It's very murky. And these things are already, to me, legal, but they're basically money laundering as well. So
correct.
This is interesting.
And the only reason that you would want to money launder political donations is because they're coming from nefarious sources.
Right. And it's just very concerning because this has been going on for a long time. This is the same strategy that Hunter Biden did, going to different shell companies. It's the same thing they do between the 501cs. We have traced through money that went through 7 different NGOs, and they just take 1% off the top and move the money, take 1% off the top and move the money.
Southern.
And that was difficult.
Southern. This is what the CIA does. The only organization that gets away with this is the CIA, which tells you that all of this is being orchestrated by the CIA. That's how they influence. I mean, USAID is a CIA front. That's how they infiltrate politics in a country. So, yeah. Miles, go ahead.
Hi, Colonel. I remember back in the 70s, I was reading somewhere and the government said that you could be labeled clinically insane if you took 50 hits of acid. And I was like, well, how do they know that? Well, now I have a name for it. It's called the Kentucky experiment.
Yeah.
So, a question for you. And if we've covered this, I mean, my memory is not that good anymore. Where was Castro getting his intel to fight Batista? Was he getting that from the CIA too?
Yes. Yes.
Playing both sides? Okay.
So,
that's right.
Yeah, during the Cuban Revolution, the CIA was funding both sides. They thought they could get, they knew Batista was out. Batista was corrupt. They had, basically was part of his corruption. Not that he wasn't already corrupt, or he would have never been able to stay there. But he was doing side deals, and the CIA was pissed. And they had prostituted underage girls to mafia people. They had basically destroyed Cuba. And in destroying Cuba, they had pissed off an entire population, and the revolution was coming no matter what. So they decided that they were going to co-opt the revolution by arming it and embedding themselves in it. So Castro, Raul, and Che Guevara all were trained in the mountains by CIA people. When Castro won the revolution, in the hotel where he originally set up his soon-to-be administration, on the same floor was his CIA handler. And they basically tried to co-opt him. And when they figured out that he, no kidding, was the real deal, he wasn't going to allow the mafia and William Polly and United Fruit and all them guys to come back in, they were pissed as hell. And that started the ever-ending vendetta against Cuba, because against Castro. At the time, Castro was not interested in nationalizing everything. He was not interested in working with the Soviet Union. He just wanted Cuba back to being Cuba and not infested with U.S. mafia and U.S. businessmen exploiting all of the Cubans. His being labeled a communist later on was a tactic by the CIA. And again, I'm not saying I like Castro. I'm not saying he eventually didn't turn out to be a communist, but his being labeled as a communist initially was the justification for the document 4512-2 in order to attempt to assassinate him, to get him out when they realized they couldn't co-opt him.
One more question. Have we covered Raven Rock?
I don't remember.
Oh, okay. I think that's an interesting book.
Okay. Illini?
Hey, Colonel.
Hey.
Just some more background on that whole Bay of Pigs thing quote from the Kevin Shipp book. I ran it down. That whole section comes from Jefferson Morley, who was recently at the JFK assassination hearing, chaired by Congresswoman Luna. He's known as sometimes being willing to throw a bomb or two, but he comes off as relatively level-headed. So I mean, he's quoting H.R. Haldeman's book in H.R. Haldeman claiming that the Bay of Pigs was code for the JFK assassination. And to back that up a little bit, number one, JFK is you can search the Nixon tapes at easynixon.org. And if you run that search on Bay of Pigs, it comes up 61 times. And from my experience, Nixon does seem relatively obsessed with it.
Yes.
And, he does actually reference it when he talks to Helms on the October 8th, 1971 conversation.
Yes.
Where Nixon, I mean, the clear takeaway from Nixon's conversation with Helms is, number one, he wants to know who really shot JFK.
Yep.
And therefore, number two, he knows that the whole Warren Commission thing was bullshit.
Yes.
That is Nixon behind closed doors. It's like, I can't quite make the joke here. Okay. So he's basically locking all the doors, shutting all the windows, and saying, "Look, the whole Warren Commission thing—that's bullshit. We've got the whole thing on tape."
Okay. So that happens in 1971.
Yes, and this conversation between Haldeman and Helms was in 72, right after Watergate, like the summer.
And right, so they do Watergate in 1972.
So it seems to back up. It seems to back up Haldeman's story too, though, that to Nixon, the JFK Bay of Pigs was sort of code for the JFK assassination.
Correct. Because that supposedly was the CIA's story in saying it was the Cubans that did it, right? And you can't miss the timing of him saying that, and then he's out of office.
So then it must be that the real code behind this conversation here, and there's a lot of different ways of interpreting it, but one potential way of doing it isn't Nixon saying, hey, I need to know who really shot JFK. What he's saying to Helms is, hey, what are the CIA's documents on this? So when the real story, the quote-unquote real story, comes spilling out of the CIA, just like we had with this whole spill on the Pentagon Papers, what are the documents that are going to come out that the CIA used to fabricate the whole thing and basically run their whole maze operation, where we're never going to know the real truth, but what's their backup story on this?
Right.
That could have been what they were really saying.
Because, and then that's where understanding Nixon's history is so important. Because if you believe that Nixon was a good guy and he wants to get to the bottom of it, you're going to come away with one conclusion. But if you go back and actually know that Nixon was the vice president to Eisenhower, and that's the piece I missed until I started doing this research, because again, you have hypotheses that in the research either proves to be true or not true. And when I first started doing this research, one of the things that I came away with was, oh, holy shit, was Nixon set up? Until you focus on Eisenhower, excuse me, and know that the entire time that Gladio was being set up, Nixon was vice president. Nixon was in all of the Security Council meetings. Nixon was there when they gave the order to kill Lubamba. Nixon was there when they were doing the Guatemala thing. Nixon was involved in all of the shady shit that the CIA did, which leads me to believe, based on what you just said, that he was really kind of wink, wink. Hey, what do you guys got that may come tumbling out that we don't necessarily want to have come tumbling out? What's your next step?
Yeah, well, what is the next paper that's going to drop out of, classified hands? We just had the Pentagon Papers.
Yes.
What else do I need to know about?
Yes.
But he's saying in this conversation, too, and, maybe he's trying to coax Helms, maybe not, but he is saying in this conversation that he's going to protect the Department of Dirty Tricks, and he fully expects we'll be doing many dirty tricks in the future.
Yes. Yes.
Now, this is in reference, of course, to foreign operations is kind of the kinder and gentler interpretation of it. Now, I think based on that conversation, Nixon's clearly in hell. Which circle is he, at the bottom of the pit, with everybody else? Is he the ninth circle? I don't know.
Is he just in hell or is he under hell?
Is he the worst of the worst? He clearly got caught at the end of the day, and maybe that's slightly mitigating here, but I don't know.
Yeah. SR-71.
Thank you, Colonel. Well, I certainly didn't tell Nixon about Watergate, which was next on the agenda. But anyway, in Kevin Shipp's analysis of what he was talking about concerning Shackley, I got the impression he knew exactly what was going on in the CIA before he even met Shackley. Is that true?
I think, like most people, it was not until they tried to assassinate him and his family that, again, he was operating in a very stovepipe system. He got his first hint that something wasn't right when he went to the State Department to reveal the bugs in the computer system. Now, for most people, at least for me, I'll speak for me. If I knew that an organization that I worked for was so unethical that they risk exposing every single overseas CIA officer, there's no fucking way I would stay working for that organization, especially when they have the ability to assassinate people. That's just me. He stayed working for that organization. And when it, again, and this is so important, you can, as a human being, rationalize that being in that organization, that it's just a temporary leadership problem, not that it's widespread. That if I just get this Krongard guy out, but I think it dawned on him when he saw Shackley still hanging around there, that the entire thing was corrupt. There's a lot of justification you do in your head when you're basically wedded to a career and an organization on the inside. And I think that there, again, once the CIA began attacking him personally, it became personal, and he decided to part ways. He had lost everything at that point, unfortunately for him. So I can't, and that's the reason why I wanted to bring this book to you guys. He's a guy on the inside. He went through overwhelming personal sacrifice, and instead of walking away and wanting to protect himself and live to fight another day, he wrote this book. He wanted everybody to know, and that definitely says a lot about his character. So I think you have to weigh both sides of that and come to your own conclusion.
Thank you, Colonel. But and I agree with what you said, because I know working at IBM, I worked with some bosses at one point that were just unfreaking believable. And my way of looking at it was, just wait, I'm going to be here long after you're gone.
Yeah.
So yeah, I get that. Thank you.
Yeah, sure. Carrie, go ahead, and then we'll go to Southern.
Hi, Colonel. I got in a big fight the other day at an event, and I just want your kind of feedback about it and your help. So this guy said he was going to a protest, protesting Trump. This was Saturday, and it was a nationwide protest. And the person he was telling, who I was talking to, they were just like, you know, they're the good guys and they're going to, you know, protest this really bad guy. And I didn't start screaming at him, but I was like yelling at him, but in a low you know what I mean? And I just kind of lost it. And I was like, I said so many things, but the sticking point for me was I started saying, you know, what is Operation Gladio? What is the Fabian Society? What is the Hegelian dialectic? They were like, I don't know. And it was really hard for me to explain to them that reality. And it was really painful for me that I couldn't get through to them. And they were so resistant because, you know, they're good and I'm bad. And I'm trying to tell them, you know, I'm Occupy Wall Street. And they were like, well, I was Occupy Wall Street in St. Louis. And I was like, no, you don't even understand Occupy Wall. You don't know anything about it. Like, you're just like a puppet. I mean, I really went off on them. You should have seen their face. But it was difficult for me because I'm like, well, these people, they don't, are they bad people? I don't know. It's really hard, like, to decipher this good and bad thing. And then I'm thinking about the Hegelian dialectic, which has framed us out in this dynamic of they're good, I mean, they're bad and I'm good, or vice versa. Sometimes, like, we've internalized this whole shit idea of life that whereby, you know, there's yin and yang, there's bad and good. And so it pushes these extremes of these fucking sociopath CIA people, and we're all like that. You know what I mean? I mean, it just really, it fucked with my brain. The whole scenario fucked with my brain, and I can't get out of it. I need your help.
You never know what the end result of engaging people are. Most people are going to instinctively react defensively when they're presented with new information, but you don't know the second and third order effects of that. And that's kind of my take on all of this. In the case of having these conversations, if you get emotional, you need to leave. You're not going to be able to be convincing if you're the one being emotional. So that's step number one. Step number two is the asking of questions, because that then can lead, and has led in my experience, to people going back and say, what was that? I don't know what that is. Let me look that up. Because if you come across as knowing things they don't know, they don't want that to ever happen again. But you can't do it emotionally. You have to do it very factually. And if you challenge them to go and look at material, you may never see that person again, and you don't know whether or not they look at the material. But again, in my case, the people that I've engaged with, they tend to go look that information up, and they will come back with their next argument. And that's basically how I was able to work through my entire neighborhood and my family over a period of time. You're not going to do it on a street corner. You can plant seeds on a street corner. You're not going to watch the tree grow. And you need to come to grips with that. If you're going to be a spreader of truth, you can't do it emotionally. You have to be 100% unemotional and factual, and you speak with authority, like you know something they don't. And when you do that, if they're legitimate, they are going to go back and look up things so that they don't have that happen to them again, because it's very off-putting to someone who's trying to portray themselves as someone in the know when they meet someone who knows things they don't. And you again, because it's a stranger, you're not going to know the effect that you had on them, but you just know that you provided them something that if they choose to use it, then they will be the better for it. But at the end of the day, you can't control them or their response. Southern, go ahead.
That is 100% true, because their response will be immature. It will be high emotion, pushback. Then it'll be something about you. Then they'll bring another person in that agrees with them. You're in a loop you can't get out of. So Colonel's right. If it's emotional, walk away. You can only do it sometimes by asking a simple question, because you can't go wide and deep about this. It's too much information. So it has to be done very simply. And it's finding out what matters to them and focus on that one thing where you can open the door. And so if you can show that, then maybe they're willing to listen to something else. What else do you think is true? And it's very difficult. I spent 2 weeks in spaces, in rooms, most of them were women that were extreme liberals. After 2 weeks, I felt like I needed to have a download of my body and my soul to detox it, because they will bully you, they will jump and gang up, and they're not listening. Until they're ready to listen, you really don't have a door to open. But it's just being honest, but keep it simple. Keep it simple. But anyway, going back to Shackley, and I bring this up every time I can, because George H.W. Bush was heavily involved in getting heroin and marijuana to our troops to fund black ops. He was nicknamed Poppy, and he worked with Bang Powell, who was anti-communist, needing money to get things moving forward in Vietnam. And obviously Air American, as you say, Colonel, keeps popping up everywhere. They just changed the name after a while. But the CIA with Colby, because Shackley was 66, he was in Laos, 67, CIA station in Saigon, and you have the Golden Triangle. So he became heavily involved moving these drugs through, and we had CIA face presenting in those. And there's even, and I can't find this, you may know this, Colonel, because we knew that it reached a crisis level. I work in medical, and at least 25% of our soldiers came back hooked on heroin. Some units had a higher percentage, some were 10 to 15%. Overall, it was around 25%. They had drug OD deaths every day somewhere in a unit. That's how bad it was. But they did it to have Black Ops funding, and USAID was involved. Ron Rickenbach, working with the pilot Neil Hansen with Bang Powell, to set up aircraft for the opium transport, and the U.S. oversight. They were doing things on the side, getting that done. And what blows my mind is George H.W. Bush even said that he would be president one day. That is the type of people that we have had in office. I do not like the Bush family. I know why we went to Iraq, and it was about them. And it just blows my mind that we today are just now getting documents to prove this. And it's 2025. That is freaking awesome. And I'm so glad we have X, because I'm not sure we could do this anywhere else. Do you think?
Yeah, I agree. Illini, go ahead.
Hey, Carrie. Look, you have a huge opportunity here because of, all your relationships with Occupy Wall Street. If a conversation comes up with like this again, everybody on the left knows about Allende and Chile. And I think that's a pretty good place to start, because we have the documents on it and we know how it happened. It started with a conversation between the ITT and the revolving door with the CIA. And we have that information from Jack Anderson. That's Washington Post. That's canon. And we also know that it wound up, with these false flag kidnappings of generals and manipulation of the press with El Mercurio. And that's all detailed in Peter Kornbluth's book. And you can actually go to chapter 1, document 13 of the book, where you can get the actual document where they say that they're going to run a false flag and they're going to blame the communists for kidnapping a general.
Yep.
And that whole thing happened, and we have the documents. We have the declassified documents sourced from the CIA, where we got the admission against interest that this is how they operate. And that was how that was the environment that Brennan got, brought up in.
Yep.
And why should we be shocked that in 2015 or 2016, we've now got, Michael Schellenberger, Matt Taibbi, and I think a number of declassified documents on Crossfire Hurricane that show us exactly what happened here. Trump got framed by the CIA. They're running the same thing on him that they ran on Allende back in the 70s. And yeah, there's all kinds of problems with Trump. I mean, I'm not going to defend him and his ability to he often gets, it's often obvious when he's lying, but the good news is everybody can tell at the very least and call him out on it. And it's a lot harder for him to actually run the kinds of operations that have been run on us for years and years and years previously.
Okay, Miles.
Colonel, I've been noticing that these influencers on this platform, who I call them the chaos agents, they're pushing for war against India and Pakistan. Does that have earmarks of Gladio on it?
So the original attack was definitely a Gladio event up in the tourist area of Kashmir. They have encircled India with destabilization. They had a very India-friendly prime minister in Bangladesh that they overthrew. That was Operation Gladio. And they have now destabilized the north and the west area of India. So they are trying to destabilize India. India has been very upfront as a member of BRICS and in engagement with Trump. And they are trying to intimidate India by provoking them into doing something that would basically bring down the the leadership of India. So yes, in the sense that they are trying to create turmoil over there and using Operation Gladio terrorist attacks or destabilization, as they did in Bangladesh with the run-ins and the street protests and all that other stuff, to get rid of that prime minister there as well. So yes, in effect. SR 71.
Thank you, Colonel. Concerning India and Pakistan, I don't know how many people follow Alex Cristofaro, but I listened to a Rumble session from him this morning, and he talked about India and Pakistan. And one of the things that came up that we don't have verification on yet, but he's got it from two sources to say Pakistan really doesn't want to get into a war with India. They don't have the weapons. So now we know where all the weapons are gone and why Pakistan doesn't have the weapons. But you're right, the chaos is there.
Well, let me also the CIA and their apparatus is pissed off at Pakistan, which has been a controlled satellite of the CIA. The ISI and the CIA are like kissing cousins. However, more recently, Pakistan has tried to establish a relationship with China, and they have the economic corridor that goes from the northern sector all the way down to their ports. And recently, the Afghanistan has said that they want to build a pipeline to tap into that economic corridor. So the CIA and their controllers are desperately trying to wreak havoc in that area. And it is highly possible that that operation was done without the leadership's knowledge in Pakistan in order, again, to destabilize that area. Because Pakistan has been trying desperately, not that what they did with Khan and all that other stuff isn't bullshit, but they have been trying to separate themselves from their controllers, and that has not worked well for them because any country that tries to stand on their own 2 feet economically and divorce themselves from the controllers in the West usually does not fare very well. Carrie, go ahead.
Yeah, so Pakistan and India, Pakistan was set up by basically Operation Gladio in the first place, and it runs along the line of the Hegelian dialectic. So, there's the Hindu and the Muslim, and the British fucking did that on fucking purpose. The other thing I want to address is that when I was trying to talk to these people, and I don't know these people, I just ran into them at an event, as I said, when I was trying to talk to them, I was trying to explain the Hegelian dialectic. And it's really a simple thing, and it's very stupid. Like, logically, it makes no fucking sense how this is actually a thing. But trying to explain it to people, I don't know. I don't know how to do that. I mean, I really, I don't know. If anyone can help me, I would love that. Thank you.
Sure. Anybody else got anything? Nope. All right. Well, that's it for today. I will be back at 8:00. We're going to do that breakdown of the Minutemen, and it's going to be fun. We're going to do it like we did before and kind of do like a live dig. I will be live on both Rumble and on X simultaneously. The documents will be shown on the Rumble channel so that you can kind of go through the documents with me. Moneypenny, go ahead.
Sorry. Hey, stranger. How are you? How's
Good.
your car? Are you still loving it?
I'm still loving it.
Good stuff. So very quickly, and it may seem off topic, but you are the authority on anything that is being fiddled with behind the scenes. Do you have any idea who or why NASA and related space weather agencies, anybody that does global output on big things like solar storms and stuff, would be deleting data? Because that's what they've done in the last 24 hours, and I'm trying to get to the bottom of it, and all the scientists are completely, bombshelled. Nobody knows who is doing it. But we think it might be related to the testing of some advanced electromagnetic railgun weapons over in Japan. Of course, the blackouts in Southern Europe and in Bali, and nobody's talking about it.
That's interesting. No, I had not heard about that, but I will definitely look into that. The whole deleting of data seems at this point impossible. And all you do is draw attention to yourself when you try. I mean, we just learned that with the Institute of Peace. Data cannot be erased, especially in government organizations where all of the information is in cloud services. So I find that very interesting.
It's global. It's worldwide. It's data that comes from global agencies on levels of electromagnetics and solar activity. So it's absolutely bizarre.
Yeah, and so it's there. They may have, but again, I think that's interesting. It shows a sense of panic, obviously. And all you do is shine a bright light on yourself when you do that, because there's ways of retrieving the data. Data cannot be erased. So yeah, that's very interesting. I'll have to look into that. Southern, go ahead.
Just another odd point. I listened to Trump. He was meeting with Mark Carney, the new Prime Minister of Canada. He said, I have spoken to the owners, and they're not going to sell to the United States, Canada. Are we talking about the Queen? Well, now King Charles in England. Do they own Canada?
Well, I mean, Canada is considered part of the British Empire.
This is hysterical. The province of Alberta wants to come into the U.S. But I just find this very bizarre. I just find that very bizarre. Very bizarre.
Yeah.
What an odd thing to say.
Yeah. But you also have to look at who, because there can be some, multiple meanings to some of those things.
Yeah.
If you look at most of Canada's major corporations, they all have ties to transnational corporations.
Yes.
So he may be referring to those owners. If you look at one of the things that American mining companies do, so when they go and exploit mines, can you turn your mic off, Southern? You're getting a lot of feedback.
Sorry.
When they go into a country, whether it's in Africa or, we were just talking about Chile, but we know they did it in Haiti as well, that the CIA overthrows a country and they want to set up mines there. They don't use the corporate U.S. mining entity. They have a subsidiary in Canada, and it's that Canadian subsidiary that ends up getting the mine contract and the concession, as they call them. And it doesn't matter. It's just like another front company, basically. But a lot of that, as I've done research, all seems to be housed in Canada. Because everybody views Canada, the country that does all of the UN peacekeeping. It's benevolent. It doesn't really have a military. They couldn't possibly be extorting these countries for nefarious reasons. And that's the reason why they open a subsidiary or they buy an existing Canadian company and control it. There's ties always back to either one in the Netherlands or Germany or England or here in the United States. It's never really a Canadian wholly owned company in and of itself. That's a pattern that I've definitely discovered because, again, it's another layer of plausible deniability that it has nothing nefarious to do with the quote unquote West trying to steal all of their resources. So.
Yeah, because we do have a lot of corporates over there that are American technically based companies.
Yeah.
In Canada.
Yeah, so he may have been making. I
always wondered why. So this makes sense.
Yeah, he may have been making an offhanded comment, putting those people on notice. So anyway, all right, guys, I'm going to go have dinner and get ready for our show tonight. Take care, everyone. Thanks for being here.
Thanks, Colonel.
Thanks. All right, guys, y'all have been very active in the chat over here, I see. Let's see. Nationwide EAS. Oh, yippee. Thanks, Mayor Sarge. That's just what I needed to hear. Need to be alert on any testing from our government. Oh, let's see. Okay, I'm going to jump off of here. See you guys at 8 o'clock. Take care.